I just want to warn everyone that today's episode, if you're watching it in a video form, David and I are both very shiny, and we apologize.
I showered this morning too, and I'm like, why can I see myself in the recessions of where my hairline is starting to go?
No, look at this. I have a cut on my face. Like the shine, I tried a new blush. It's extra shiny. Maybe you tried a different blush and you're just admitting it's not the blush.
Oh, yeah. Can I do a product plug?
Yes. Okay.
So this is like, this summer I worked on a project that I can't give the details about, or otherwise they'll sue me because I have an NDA. But let's get to the moral of the story.
Okay.
You can work backwards from here to figure out what I was working on. The FDA doesn't regulate cosmetic products.
What?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Like you could take drugs that if you were to ingest,
right,
would be under FDA regulation. Like,
right.
If you were to make collagen and put it in a pill that you were supposed to swallow, the FDA has to review that application.
Sure.
But if you take collagen and you put it in a serum and then you wash it on your face, the FDA doesn't touch it. They just like let it fly.
And that's very dangerous, right? Because collagen and stuff can be, I mean, like serums and stuff go into your skin.
Yeah.
That's a different story. Yeah.
What has happened is the pharmaceutical industry is now getting smart. And they're like, they used to hate doing cosmetics because they were like, we don't make any money. There's no regulation. And then they were like, oh, wait a minute.
Like, there's money.
We could take a bunch of drugs that have failed that like are supposed to puff your skin up or like stop scarring and just like whip it into one big serum and then sell it. It costs them like $15 to make. They're like, oh, here's a $400 face cream.
I'm shook to the core.
It's brilliant. And they work. So there's this new company. There's this MD. He did this thing. It's called 8th Day. And it's like insane. There's so much junk that they packed into these things.
But is it
but they
good
work
junk?
and they're amazing. Yeah, it's amazing.
So like it's like a
we love it
in a bottle.
Yeah, it works.
Okay.
It stops scarring, like all the fun stuff. But it's essentially just a bunch of drugs that failed clinical trials that were like supposed to stop scarring or improve wound healing or like all these things. And this guy just like mixed them all together and was like, here you go. It's $400, but it works.
Holy shit. Well, we're going to be buying it.
And the branding's amazing. So shout out to 8th Day. Face brought to you by 8th Day. Didn't use it this morning, which is why you can see me in my forehead.
David, once again, we're back here with the hot topics.
You gotta stop letting me go on tangents.
No, David, let me tell you something. The fans have spoken. And when I mean the fans have spoken, I mean my friends have spoken. I told you this on the phone, but I just want to say it once again on the pod, that I have had all of my friends call me and be like, oh my God, so like, I guess like we didn't really listen to the pod before, but we did. No, wait, let me take that back. That's not what they said. They said it like this. They said, okay, so all my friends had reached out to me, a lot of them actually, and they said, wow, David Haggerty is so brilliant. He knows so much. And not just that, like he is so entertaining to listen to. I look forward to his episodes. You need to have him on all the time. I go, I have had him on all the time. He's been on since the beginning of this podcast has started. And they go, no. They just never listened before. So
maybe I was just bad. Maybe I've started hitting my stride.
No, my friends never listened before. They lied, and that's okay. But it's okay because it means the numbers have boosted up like quadruple now. And the people have spoken. They love you, David. And you have been the go-to guy to go to with information, with facts, with pregnancy questions, with depression questions, with anxiety questions, with bipolar questions, all the questions, including now, I guess, something that I've wanted to talk about for a long time, and I did not know that it was a specialty of yours, because even though I've known you for so long, it's like a learning curve every single day. But this is what's so wild. Okay, so I got an email 2 days ago from my mom with an article from the Daily Mail. And, Daily Mail, very hit or miss, like with things, right? Very hit or miss.
A lot of misses. A lot of misses.
But a lot of hits. A lot of hits.
A lot of hits with the royal family. A lot of misses with science.
Sure. But what was interesting about it was that it was talking about autism, and it brought up this medication called Lamictal, lamotrigine, which is the medication that I was put on for healing, and I say that in quotes, my bipolar 1 disorder. Now, the reason why this was sent to me was not because of the lamotrigine. It was not sent to me because of a Daily Mail UK hit. It was sent to me because my mom's great niece is on the spectrum, among many other people in our family, on my mom's side of the family, but specifically her great niece. And I always cry about it, but I'm not going to cry, but it's a very sensitive thing, because it's something that, you can argue to the depths of, why did this happen? Did this have to do with shots? Did this have to do with environment? Did this have to do with food? Did it have to do with what happened when you were pregnant? Everything, right? And at the end of the day, I heard Brendan Fraser on Howard Stern last week, or a couple weeks ago now. And it was so fascinating because he lives with a child who's on the spectrum. And he said the best thing that I'd ever heard in regards to autism. He goes, you can argue to the death for why it happened, but it doesn't matter why it happened, because it did. And it's here, and it's what's the solution, and how can we help nurture this human being, right, to be the best form of themselves. And so when you see, my mom's, niece who's younger, she's now 6 or 7. Don't quote me on that. To see what the future brings in regards to children who are on the spectrum, specifically children. And also, this is my tangent for a second, so give me a moment on my soapbox.
No, keep tangenting. Keep tangenting.
I watch that show, Love on the Spectrum, and it's the cutest show of all time. It's amazing.
All time.
It's
Netflix plug.
Netflix plug. It is the best show, right? And it makes you believe, oh my God, love is so pure. Love is universal. Love is for all of us. And when I watched that show, the first thing I thought of was her, because I thought, oh my gosh, there is hope, right? And it's so beautiful and it's so pure. And I'm not saying, where she is on the spectrum of the, is she as high on the spectrum as some of these kids or lower? And it doesn't matter. But it's the point of, what can we do to help? And so when my mom saw that the medicine that saved her daughter's life for bipolar disorder possibly could be something that's on the way to saving those who are on the spectrum, it was an emotional game changer, to say the least, for my mom. So, David, what is this that we are learning? They said that they are, according to the Daily Mail, they're learning on mice.
No, this is real. This is straight up real.
Yeah,
I don't know what is in the Daily Mail, and I'm not going to plug the Daily Mail for anything other than just absolutely trashing the royal family, and awkward Boris Johnson photos. May he rest in peace. He's still alive, but as the PM. Sure. Okay, how much of a background should we do here? So what I think is really interesting, and why I asked this question, is I'm going to do me.
Yeah.
The reason I find this really interesting is the term on the spectrum is very new.
Right.
So the fact that someone, not to pick on you, but without a medical training.
Yeah. Yes.
But the fact that being on the spectrum, lay people, as we like to refer to them in medicine, a lay person. So the it used to be Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or the ICD, International Classification of Diseases. DSM is Diagnostical and Statistical Manual. These are the things that we use to diagnose and define what are and what aren't sort of mental disorders.
Okay.
In the 4th revision in the 5th revision. So up until the 4th version, they update them like every decade or something. The last update was early 2010s, maybe 2011, 2012. I was in college. One of my professors was on the revisions committee, which is why I know all the inside baseball here. Wow. She's a boss ass bitch. We love her.
Love her. Boss ass bitch.
They changed it. It was autism and Asperger's.
Okay.
Were the two diagnoses. People that were more severe got diagnosed with having autism disorder. There was no spectrum yet.
Okay.
And people that had less severe forms of it, which were just sort of difficulties in social environments, not severe learning disabilities, just like being awkward, essentially, were diagnosed with Asperger's. Asperger's, German scientist, potentially Nazi affiliated. We can do the whole history. But he was the guy who came up with the fucking refrigerator mother terms. Like, they thought that autism was originally caused by mothers that were cold to their offspring.
What?
So the term refrigerator mother came into the vernacular and was essentially like, they used to blame mothers for kids that got diagnosed with autism because they thought it was a lack of maternal care in the early years of their lives.
That's insane.
So this is where we started, just for context.
And this is where we are now.
So this is where we are now. So for many years, autism and Asperger's were like two separate tracks.
So it's not Asperger's? Sorry.
No, I think it is. I don't know. Don't quiz me on my pronunciation.
Okay.
He's German. So like just say it with a German. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. He drove a Volkswagen and he diagnosed mothers for being bad mothers, essentially.
Wow. Crazy.
Bad history.
Bad.
So what, I don't know, early 2000s roll around, everybody starts getting upset, being like, this is probably bad. And this is like a larger trend in mental health just in general. We moved from having really classified, siloed versions of diseases or disorders and moved them into this idea of it is a spectrum. They did it with alcoholism. They turned it into alcohol use disorder. You could have mild, moderate, or severe alcohol use disorder. They did it with autism. You are now autism spectrum. You are mild, moderate, or severe autism. So there was a lot of social pushback. People that were like, that had been diagnosed with Asperger's. They're like, what do you mean I'm autistic now?
Yeah.
And then there were people that were like, oh, this is such a saving grace. When I say that my child is autistic, they think they're the worst, most unsociable, can't dress themselves, like the most severe forms of the disorder. And like now that we moved to a spectrum disorder, and we're like 10 years out from that change, it's really unlocked. The narrative changed. So the narrative changed. What also happened was the rates of diagnosis went through the roof because the criteria changed. It became a more inclusive definition. And if you like go back and do a bunch of internet searches, like especially around, I guess we should talk about the vaccine issue as well. But like the rates of autism spike around this time because doctors are now being refreshed, are more aware of what meets inclusion criteria for a diagnosis, and more people are now self-identifying as being on the spectrum, where in previous time, so like the rates go up and then everyone's like, oh shit, it must be the water, it must be the vaccines. Like you said, like people start searching for solutions. Right. And I'm like,
honestly,
so
I know you also can't blame them though, because
no, totally, I understand.
Because when you have a child that's sick, I mean, I just think of my mom when she was dealing with me when I was a kid, and the unknown, it's
you
like,
have no idea.
You start doing a countdown, right? Of like, why is a kid have an allergic reaction, right? You're like, you know, is it the food that I'm giving them? Is it the water? Is it the stuff that I'm in their bubble bath? Like, is it one of their toys? You know,
everything.
You do these checklists. So it's like at some point, like, yes, but you can't blame people, you know?
Totally understand. The layman's term 5-second version of the whole vaccine controversy too is Andrew Wakefield publishes a paper in the Lancet in the early 2000s, maybe 2001, 2002, suggesting that vaccines cause autism through a change in inflammation state, yada, yada, yada. All the data was fake. Completely. The paper's been retracted. It's one of the most cited papers still to this day. It's just like bad science leaking into an anxious public, being
Right,
every day over and over again, the effects compound. You see this huge increase in anti-vax communities, especially in communities of higher socioeconomic status. So like people that have money. So like Northern California, Marin used to be a huge hotspot for people not vaccinating their children because they thought it would cause autism. And then COVID hits and the whole thing flips. What we thought was going to be a really vaccine resistant community because of what happened with autism, we were completely wrong about. And Marin County has one of the highest vaccination rates against COVID in the country.
Why? Out of curiosity.
So it's just, but that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't have the real answer for you why, but it just goes to show you how politicized vaccines plus autism turned out to be and not be rooted in actual medical literature.
Right.
We'll get back to, so the through line, the initial question is what, the last caveat I have to do is it is autism spectrum disorder, not disease. Diseases must have biological underpinnings. If you have high blood pressure, it is a disease because I can strap a blood pressure cuff on you, pump it up, and actually give you a measure, a quantitative measure of this is normal range, you fall above that range. For things like autism, we don't know. There is no biomarker, biological basis that we understand.
Sure.
So what has happened is that an attempt to get to a biomarker, a lot of the research is like, let's find one.
Right.
Let's find a thing we can measure in a blood test or a brain scan or something where we can definitively say, if you are positive on this test, you have this disorder, which would then reclassify it as a disease. And if you're negative, then you're fine. So we've moved that direction. We've tried to do it through genetics. We've tried to do it through brain scans. There are people that look at analyzing first birthday videos, like old school VHS tapes.
Sure.
Of kids' first birthday to try and match their motor movements, their cries and stuff, and like build diagnostic models out of them. The average age of diagnosis of autism is around the age of 4. And we know that early intervention helps modify disease severity. So like you could potentially have severe autism, but if you get help early and like get social training and like go through like specialized pre-K programs, you can end up being on the mild end of the spectrum. So there's a huge push to try and diagnose earlier.
Right. And like my pediatrician, like when I first started going to him with Lady, you know, there were certain things that he was doing, like certain eye tests, like not like, oh, let me check her eyes, but certain like tracking.
Yeah, like object permanence, like all the fun stuff.
He did all of that stuff when like she was 6 weeks old, started doing that. And every time we go in there, to start seeing if there's any signs, because he's very big on this, right? And I'm very lucky because I think I know that's not a standard
part of primary care. No.
Right. And I've heard that
should
from a lot
be.
of people.
Yeah. Should be. But so like this idea is like we don't really have a good biomarker, but we understand that it's brain development.
Sure.
Seems to be a large part of this. This is what we test for. This is what we try and analyze. Way back when we talked about Lamictal and what's the one that starts with a D, Depakote, the other drug that they give people for bipolar disorder during pregnancy, when we did that huge episode. Those drugs originally were seizure medications.
Right.
They
are still prescribed for seizures, are they not? Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Where most of the clinical trial data comes from, where most of the research and development is done, is in treating febrile seizures.
In which, just on a side note, if you have not listened to that episode, I highly recommend you go back because it's so important for people to understand as to why the reason why I got off my medication when I started to try to have a baby was because the stuff that was out there, right? That was the data, the data or whatever, was all from anti-seizures, and not from people who women who lived with bipolar 1 disorder, which is very different. So that is why that happened. So go back and listen to that, put a pause on this and come back.
But
and they're back.
They're back. So what we know is that drugs, so these drugs, essentially what they're doing is they're changing the rate and frequency or intensity at which the neurons in your brain are firing.
Right.
We like to, like, neuroscientists will talk like generally about excitability and inhibition. So like if you have a bunch of neurons firing really fast, like that is their excitability profile. And then if they stop firing, they become inhibited.
Sure.
So, and it's like a very controversial term in the research community. We won't get into it, but what you could do is you can essentially stick somebody in an MRI machine, measure how excitable their brain is, and then calculate what we call an excitatory to inhibitory ratio.
Okay.
How over-excitatory or under-excitatory is your brain? And for people that have seizures that are like grand mal seizures where you have all this activity, that excitatory balance is through the ceiling.
Right.
Your brain is firing too much while you're seizing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different types of seizures. There are some seizures that happen because your brain actually isn't firing.
Right.
So it's like this activity of inhibition, like your brain isn't doing what it's supposed to, and then it tries to compensate and has that big spike, and that's why you seize. So it's complicated, but essentially what these drugs do is they change the excitability profiles of the neurons in your brain.
Interesting.
So they're really good at treating seizures. And then we were like, oh, wait a minute. They're also really good at treating bipolar and schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Because we know that parts of those disorders have some attributable mass or explain some of the variants. And like, oh, if we give these drugs that change excitability profiles in people's brains, they respond better. And now what people are realizing is, oh shit, autism spectrum disorder is a developmental neuronal process that goes awry. What if we bias that developmental process by giving drugs that change the excitability profiles through development? Wow. So things like Lamictal, when given to somebody who gets an early diagnosis, forcibly rewires the brain potentially for a better outcome. This is like old school hammer and chisel into a stone. Like this is not like a cool technique yet. It's not as targeted. This is like as hammer and stone and like Bronze Age as you can get in medicine. But people are like, oh, wait a minute. And we have all this genetic data and we have all this video data and we have this like what we call like multimodal data, blood pressure, blood tests, you know, like if you are suspected to have autism spectrum disorder at an early age, you see a physician often. So with the amount of clinical data that we have describing these situations now sort of interfaced with potential like pharmacology treatments are going to modify disorder outcomes like by magnitudes that we never thought were humanly possible.
Well, and I will say this, where my cousin, my little cousin is based out of, in this town that she lives in, the school there for kids who are on the autism spectrum compared to the normal elementary school is bigger. It is more populated. And it is so wild to me because, wow, I'm so glad now we're able to say, okay, well, this is, you're on the spectrum. And it is a spectrum. It goes from 0 to 100. There could be little things in between. You could be high up. But the fact is, there are that many kids in this one town that are living with this, and parents who are living with this, and grandparents, and everyone trying to figure out the fact that there is a pill out there that has been tried and tested and true on other similar symptoms of disorders, right? Not diseases, disorders.
It's very hard to catch yourself. It takes a lot of practice.
I just did.
I'm proud of you. I'm very proud of you.
Disorders, you know, it's mind-boggling that a $3 a day pill could change their life.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. If you look, and it's starting to make a lot of clarity, like sense too. Like if you look at how we model autism spectrum in mice, what we do is we make genetic mutants. And the genes that we target, so like that we make genetic mutants, we mutate specific genes in mice, and then like you watch them behave and they seize or they struggle to interact with other mice. Like you essentially try and replicate some validity between the mouse model that you're using and what the human condition looks like. All the genes we mutate are like neurotransmitter genes. Like the Shank3 mouse model is like the most famous version of how you create an autistic mouse, like air quotes for the people that can't see me. Yeah. It's just like changing excitability profiles in neurons. That's all it is. Wow. Single gene mutation, recapitulates human autism in a mouse.
So can I ask you something about like a personal thing? So, there are many things that I do not talk about on the podcast that I guess I could talk about, but I never thought to talk about it. But certain things that I have, certain tactile issues, certain sound issues. I have severe OCD. I don't really talk about it that much. Everything I do has to add up to 5, and I have to count it to 5. And, but that... I should talk about it since it's all mental health, but it's like
not to laugh at you, but
let's laugh. But I mean, when I have other issues, I'm like, oh, that's nothing. What do you mean? Like I have to add every address to become one number. Neither here nor there. But there are moments that have happened in my relationship with Sturgis where he has sat me down in a very serious matter and been like, I really think it wouldn't be a bad idea if you got tested to see if you were on the spectrum. I'm like, you're crazy. Like me calling him crazy. You know what I mean? Like the normal one. Like, you're insane. I was like, how dare you label me? As I'm like hosting a mental health podcast and I label myself. And like, it's just turning the tides. But it was one of those things where I'm not saying that it's genetic or whatnot, but we know that bipolar disorder is genetic and it comes from my dad's side. But there are certain, spectrum issues that I've noticed on my mom's side and we've seen it now with my cousin. Is there a possibility that the reason why Lamictal worked so well for me was because there was a little bit of a spectrum issue on top of the bipolar disorder? Or am I now just like craving more issues? And I'm like,
no. So what we're going to get started on is, how do I do this in a way that doesn't lead us down a 2-hour tangent?
We can also put a pause in this and put a pin in this because this is a conversation.
I might actually have one in this room.
David is getting
the DSM is like this. DSM is like this thick. I'm like making
DSM stand for again?
The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
Right. Okay.
So like the book that we use to diagnose mental health disorders. I've gone through it because I'm a nerd.
Yeah.
I think I meet criteria for like 17 different disorders.
Sure.
But like the issue here is that there is a bunch of overlap in symptoms between all of them.
Right.
So this is not medical advice. This is not me trying to predict the future. But what this is and there are other researchers that will fall in line with this, but maybe not to the extent that I do.
Okay.
I fundamentally believe that there are probably, in actuality, defined by a biological basis. Like something is wrong, here's a biomarker, we can measure it. Probably 4 or 5 mental disorders, diseases.
Yeah.
We have created hundreds of names for them.
Right.
And find ways to describe them differently. Bipolar 1 versus bipolar 2 versus,
but you're
schizophrenia versus. It's all the same shit, man.
Yeah.
It's all the same. Like you have, what likely is happening is that there are some overlap between all of these disorders. I don't think Lamictal worked for you better than it might work for somebody else because you are on the spectrum. What I think is that in your brain, like the actual underlying biology, there is something that is transiently different that Lamictal targets that happens to the Venn diagram. The middle happens to be the overlap between the diagnostic criteria for bipolar disorder and autism.
Right.
It is not that you have both.
Right.
It is that both are described by the same common disease. Like the fancy word is etiology, like the occurrence of what's going wrong biologically that causes us to use language that describes those two diseases as something different. It's probably the same underpinning.
Right. Right.
So like you're taking a drug that doesn't care what the label the doctor gives you.
Right. Right.
You're taking a drug that targets some biology that is supposed to make the label that you've been given better.
Right.
And just because you haven't been given a label of autism spectrum disorder does not mean that the genetic targets that underlie these things are not present in your body that then they can act on.
Sure.
I mean, like, fundamentally speaking, like, I'm probably somewhere on the spectrum. Like, how are you? And like, a lot of researchers make this joke, like, how are you this excited and like meticulous and detail oriented about a single research topic for 35 years and make a career out of it? Like,
Yeah,
there
I
are
know.
elements
Yeah.
of
Psychosis.
science. Well, yeah, that too. Well, I did get diagnosed with that one, but the psychosis part is not a mystery. But I mean, like, extremely good at math and science. Like, I'm not trying to stigmatize or generalize to like make people that have these. I'm not doing this to disparage, but like, there are some truths to the stereotype. Struggle 100%. with social stimuli, struggle with strong light and sound, like extremely detail oriented, and like have the ability to do math that like most people cannot even describe in English. Like, it is like, there are a lot of characteristics that fit that mapping.
Right.
Like, there are a lot of characteristics. Like, if you're somebody who's diagnosed with bipolar disorder, you're probably also going to, like, just because the way it's written, likely meet criteria for borderline personality disorder, for mild depression, for anxiety disorder, for OCD. Like, it doesn't mean that you also have all of those things, in air quotes.
No, totally.
The overlap exists because scientists and physicians don't know what they're doing. Right. Like, we need to get better, and like, the best we can do is create buckets and then put people into buckets and try and say, well, if we pick this bucket up, what's the best way we can treat it?
Yeah.
And like, that's not to say that treatment won't also work for a bunch of other disorders.
Yeah.
But like, we're in the process of figuring this out. This isn't,
sure,
I have high blood pressure, take a statin, or like their insulin is low, like pump it. Like, it's complicated, like, I don't actually know this, but I will likely guess where in the country your
please,
family member and these students in this school are, and it's probably near a facility at which they create pesticides in the Midwest.
Why do you say that?
Look, again, like, environmental toxins. Like, environmental toxins by genetic exposure. Like, the easy one to be is like, oh, it's causing autism, but it's also causing a bunch of other shit too.
Yeah.
Why do you think all of a sudden people have allergies that are like insane, that cause them to go into anaphylaxis? Like, So like, to get back to like, so I have this friend who I'm going to go work with at the NIH. She's amazing. She studies, there's a subpopulation of people who have autism that their symptoms get better when they get hot.
When they get hot? Why?
They go in saunas for like 30 minutes to an hour, and then they come out of the sauna, and for the duration at which their body temperature is elevated, they no longer present with autism.
Okay.
The change in temperature
for a second, but I'm going to make
the change in temperature.
I love a
changes
sauna, and
the
I feel better after a sauna.
Yes. Look, and like, look, there's no clinical trials here yet.
Wait.
We're working on them.
Sorry, the change of temperature
causes your neurons to fire differently. So there are people that induce fevers through sauna, through drugs that cause your core body temperature to go up, that alleviate symptoms of autism because it changes the way that your neurons fire in your head.
But how long does that last for? Only a couple hours?
Nope. Transient.
What does that mean?
So there's people, like, it just goes away quickly. Like, once your body temperature returns to normal, it's back.
That's what I mean. Like, it's, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's like 5-10 minutes.
You can't keep that up, like, for a long time.
You could live in a sauna, potentially. There's certainly people trying to figure this out. But, like, no, like, again, and, like, it makes sense. It's just fundamental physics. PV equals nRT. Like, so the Ernst equation. It's, like, basic. You just change the temperature. Your neurons fire differently.
Okay, but what if people who live in the desert? You know
Why
what I mean?
do you think people that have severe immunology, like compromised disorders like lupus, like recurring, relapsing, remitting things like MS, where do they tell those people to go live?
I don't know.
Arizona.
Because of the constant heat. of the neurons.
It's hot.
So you're
it's
saying
dry.
living in the cold
There are
is
minimal
a bad idea.
allergens. Well, it's not that it's a bad idea. I'm just
but
saying that through evolutionary time and like modern, like industrial era intoxicants and pollutants destroying your water and food supply, like mixed with a genetic history or predisposition to these things, if you grow up next to a fertilizer plant or like, you know, like we're dumping thousands of tons of nitrates on soil in the Midwest so we can grow a bunch of food for everybody. Like when you inhale these things, when you have them in your water, when you're like constantly exposed to them and there's potentially some sort of genetic predisposition, like the odds that you're going to develop these things go through the roof.
I like it's such
like the EPA isn't a joke, man. It's like it should be a healthcare crisis, not like, oh, you shouldn't be able to dump your toxic like PFAS and, you know, C40 chemicals in the water. Like it's causing people to get sick.
Yeah.
And like
it's so
people
obvious.
will look you in the face and tell you, no, this isn't true. You're like a crazy radical liberal, like yada, yada, yada. But like at the end of the day, these forever chemicals, the way that we try and have modern farming practices, the things that we release into the air, like those things alone won't do it for you. But if you've got environmental risks mixed with genetic exposure, mixed with the right timing, like why do you think incidence rates are through the roof in some counties in America?
I mean,
like, I don't mean to like dumb it down or be like, how have you not figured this out yet? But it's just like the writing is sort of on the wall.
Well, and the thing is,
we just don't talk about it ever because nobody wants to, because then it scares the shit out of everybody.
Totally. And I think that that's the problem, right? Is that I'm a firm believer in the environment, like affects who you are. I'm a firm believer in obviously genetics, right? Of like genetics affecting who you are. I'm also like a cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs person in the sense where I'm not over here like being like, don't get this, you know, shot, don't get this medication. But I'm also at the same time being very like cautious and aware, especially having a baby now, like being like, okay, I know what symptoms I went through when I lived with bipolar disorder. I know it's genetic. So if I can make sure that she eats very healthy or certain things that she does that's not going to trigger that, then why would I not do that? You know? And I think that that's where it's like.
And like the last, you know, like I don't want to make it seem like, oh, these people that live in the Midwest, you know, like I'm from the Midwest, like I grew up near cornfields, like. The issue is like, yes, this is a very small increase in the incidence rate of autism spectrum disorder. But then like you look at the confounding factors that accelerate that. If you model, so like one of my favorite papers of all time, like a nerd thing. If you're a nerd, you have like a favorite scientific paper. It's like a requirement to being a nerd. Is they looked at California right around the time when like all these incidence rates were going up for autism when they switched the diagnoses. And they asked a very simple question was, does autism spread like the common cold? Like, is it communicable? Like if I cough on you and I have a respiratory virus, like the probability of you getting a respiratory virus is like much higher. Like we understand communicable versus like if I have cancer and I cough on you, you are not going to get cancer.
Right.
If you model autism, it looks communicable. It looks like people are giving it to each other, and it's not. But but like what we do to describe the way in which autism spreads through communities is that there is likely some environmental factor or pool of genetic commonality. Like if you look at, this is like kind of gross to think about, and I'll throw the Amish community under the bus and like the Ashkenazi Jewish because they all sleep with each other. It's like a common ancestral line about it. Like, why do you think all the Russians have hemophilia? They all slept with each other. It's like the same common line. Like if there is a pool of humans that are more closely related to each other than like the surrounding communities, that pool is more genetically predisposed to environment triggering autism. As the first few cases of autism start to roll, everyone in the community is going to now be hyper vigilant to be like, oh, this could happen to my kid. I'm going to go take them into the doctor's office and get them checked.
Right.
And they're going to end up as mild on the spectrum.
Right.
Versus if they weren't in that community, they never would have had a reason to go get tested.
Sure.
So you can look at how actual biological, environmental, genetic interactions accelerate like social diagnoses of communities being like, oh, my friend's kid just got diagnosed with autism. My kid might be acting a little weird. I'm going to go take them and get a diagnosis.
Right.
So if you look at how that actually gets modeled, like in
That's
these
how it
communities in
is.
California, it looks like autism is spreading like the flu. These kids were completely fine.
Yeah.
They had scared parents. And that's totally understandable. But I'm like, I don't want this to become a runaway. Yeah.
Right.
I don't want this to become a runaway train where people are like, oh shit, I need to go get my kid tested because I live next to like a toxin or the river near me is polluted or like, but like diseases aren't easy to put in boxes.
No. And I wish
something
that
like
more
autism
doctors...
is like the hardest way to do it.
Totally.
But you've got to like, once you start to understand the mechanics by how these things play out, then it like, for some people, it obviously scares the shit out of them. But for someone like me, I'm like, oh, it all makes sense.
Well, no, it totally makes sense. And I think that the most important thing that we have to do is, I think what my whole goal is after, you know, having this in my family and learning about it, and also having a cousin who actually was in his 30s when he was diagnosed to be on the spectrum. Yeah. And it made sense, like everything that ever happened to him his entire life. It was like the same sort of thing with me with bipolar. It was like, wow, everything makes sense. And like now he can live his life like thriving, you know, because it's like he had the tools finally, you know. But I think my whole goal, you know, of this podcast and all this is it's beyond just like, oh, bipolar disorder. It's like, I want to bring awareness to autism, you know, to spectrum disorders, to bipolar disorder, to depression, to anxiety, and teach people not to be fear mongering, you know, like not that at all, but it's about being like, hey, here's the awareness, you know, let's try to shake up the doctor community, try to get them to be like, hey, help each other out. It's about communication, you know, and like the fact that I found a doctor, a pediatrician that, you know, 6 weeks postpartum, I was in there and he was talking to my baby, like trying to figure out and like, oh, okay, these are the signs, and continually does that, you know, to try to figure out like, is there spectrum disorder? Is there something going on, you know, and being overly aware, because a lot of doctors are not. And a lot of people are not. And it's about bringing the science community and the lay community, as you call us, together as one so we can help each other out. Because at the end of the day, we are all human beings just trying to survive and thrive and live the best possible way we can. David, once again, hats off to you for being the best. Any final words?
I'm sorry I'm shiny today.
I'm sorry I'm shiny today. But we're shiny.
The people aren't going to think I'm attractive anymore. This is such a sad
moment. You're very attractive.